the voices that propel us, stories of justice, action, and community. A space where justice meets action and community voices rise. Each episode, we bring you stories from the front lines, changemakers, disruptors, and everyday heroes who are building a more just, equitable, and liberated world. This is more than a podcast. It's a call to listen, learn, and move together. Just listening to music from the incredibly talented Stephen Kong. You can find him on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today we have with us Layel Camargo. Layel, they, them, is a trans and gender non-conforming Yaqui and Mayo cultural strategist born in the unceded ancestral lands of the Kumeyaay and indigenous to the Sonoran Desert. For over 15 years, Layel has advanced climate justice at the intersections of storytelling, cultural strategy, art making, and nonprofit leadership. They are the co-founder of Shelterwood Collective, an 878-acre forest restoration and land stewardship project, and the founder of Climate Woke, a narrative platform dedicated to climate justice with the Center for Cultural Power. Layel served as an impact producer for the acclaimed web series The North Pole, working alongside executive producers Rosario, Dawson, and Movement Generation. They also produced and hosted the podcast Did We Go Too Far, which explores climate, culture, and collective liberation. They're part of the inaugural fellows for the Climate Story Lab with Doc Society and Exposure Labs. In recognition of their work, Layel was named a 2020 Grist Fixer and was co-awarded a Humanitarian Award by the International Association of Sufism. They have done public speaking at institutions such as the University of Montreal, UC Santa Cruz, and the University of Pennsylvania. Layel holds a degree from the University of California, Santa Cruz. Hi, Layel. I'm so excited to have you and really honored that you're taking the time today to talk with me. You have such a rich and powerful story and done incredible work in the community. I'm excited to, just explore what you've been doing in terms of like community empowerment. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. So just starting off, Layel, your work spans so many powerful realms. So you have like cultural strategy, land stewardship, and filmmaking. When you reflect on your journey, what's the thread that connects it all for you?
I think overall is storytelling. Like, I think that one of the things that has really kept me motivated in like climate advocacy and gender justice and like advancing a career that is around like communications or, shifting narratives or policy or even land return projects. It's always been about storytelling. Like I'm really committed to uplifting narratives that aren't usually told and then trying to use that and influence that in order for us to kind of shape a world that is better than, the last couple hundred years for us in this country.
I love that. And what was it for you that first, like, that you realized, that you're really interested in like storytelling?
I don't know, but I think when I think about my trajectory,
Yeah.
when I was like 10 years old, I used to watch novellas with my mom and my sisters, and that was like a regular thing, one of the few regular things we would do in our home. And I would then spend the summer in Mexico with my cousins and with my grandmother, and I would spend most of the summer actually just writing in like a binder with like lined paper. I would just write. I know now it was a script, but I would write the characters and I would set the scene and then I would have dialogue between them. And in my pre-teen self, the conversations were always around like drug addiction or like teenage issues or like not fitting in with school or like body issues. And they were always really uh, geared towards a lot of things that I think I was, nervous about coming into puberty.
Mhm.
And so I would write these scripts and then I would pretty much coerce my younger cousins to like read them and act them out. And they were like not allowed to like leave the room or play or go downstairs to like bug my grandma until they like acted out the way I wanted them to. So I would say that I have always used storytelling as a way to process what was going on with me
Yeah.
emotionally. And I have journals dating back to like late 90s where I really use expression in writing as a way to kind of digest everything going on around me. So I think that kind of really harnessed my storytelling potential. And then I think being in college, I gravitated towards performance art as like a form of
Mhm.
activism. And so I would occasionally audition for plays where there was like the first lesbian couple that would be on stage at this particular
Mm.
play, or roles where I would be kind of performing some form of social activism. So I would say that I've just naturally always gravitated towards the arts in that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so now, fast forward to where I am now is through that I've been able to become a filmmaker. I've been,
Yeah.
great at like fundraising. I've been great at doing communication strategies. So all of those have allowed me to keep moving forward what I care about right now the most, and what I probably will dedicate the rest of my life for, which is climate justice and environmental justice.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I really love that. And can you share a moment from your early life or career that ignited your commitment to justice and community healing?
Yeah, I think it was when I came out of college in 2011.
Hmm.
I really wanted to dedicate my life. I had studied feminist studies, and I was planning to go to law school to practice what I thought was going to be like gender justice law. And I took a step back from that at the time. Like I didn't realize how inaccessible law school was. I couldn't afford it from the sense that like I couldn't have a job to be in
Yeah.
school. So I wasn't able to really provide for myself and be in school. And so I decided to just go into nonprofit work. And around like my first year of working in issues around domestic violence and sexual assault, I realized that a lot of that work, although I was very passionate about equity and specifically gender equity, I there was a gap around like people actually meeting their needs. Like there
Mhm.
was a lot of survivors and a lot of victims that didn't have their basic needs, everything from stable housing to stable employment to access to healthy food and mental health
Yeah.
services, just kind of baseline the things that would allow us to show up as humans day in and day out. And then additionally to that, as a trans person at the time I was coming into my gender identity, I realized that I didn't really fit in and we weren't really serving the populations that I cared about the most, which was people like me.
Yeah.
And so I started leaning more into my spirituality, and that was facilitated through connection with the earth and being outdoors and being involved in natural spaces. And so I realized that there's just this huge gap between our communities, which are seeking healing and
Mm.
justice, and their connection to the earth. And it started off with individual like attitudes, like shifting my diet and learning more about plastic pollution, and volunteering for like marches or events like those, or cleaning up a pond or cleaning up a beach. And then that really seeded that I wanted to do more than just direct service. I wanted to kind of help influence like the day in and day out of organizing, and seeing that now that I was so passionate about the earth, that when I would go into these organizations like Greenpeace and 350.org, that there wasn't people like me. So I just kept finding myself in these movements that I
Yeah.
was really passionate about. And so then I just continue to weave the through line, which is now I want to see trans, I want to see Black and Brown people
Yeah.
in the climate movement. And so I'm fortunate enough that I spent 7 years building up an artist network in the climate and environmental movement of people of color who are artists that are committed to environmental justice.
That's really beautiful. I really love that. And how have your lived experiences and identity shaped the way that you show up in the movement work?
Uh, let's see. I think my lived experience have always influenced all of uh, my my work. I
Hmm.
feel so lucky that most, if not all, of my like professional life has been towards me choosing a cause that I'm passionate about and just finding my role um, in a way that I could exchange my labor for my livelihood. And that's not something everybody can say that they do. And that has come at a cost of kind of making my work life my everything, but it's
Mhm.
also been so rewarding. And the reason why that's so important to me is because that is my life work. Like I grew up in a home where there was a lot of abuse, violence, poverty, lack of resources, and instability. And so when I went into the job market, I wanted to make life easier for kids like me, for young adults that are hoping to kind of break the cycle of growing up in households that have been disproportionately disenfranchised for,
Yeah.
generations. And so when being in the job market, I've always gravitated towards looking for places where I can make a difference, but specifically for people like me. So it makes sense that when I was in like the gender justice or the gender-based violence movement, that I was bringing in trans folks or
Yeah.
bringing in gender non-conforming people in, or instigating organizations to break out of the binary of who they serve and who they see as, the perpetrators, and really challenging those. And so similarly, when I went into the climate-based movement, looking at how dominantly white it was,
Yeah.
and mostly male led, I started to really try to find the ways where we could get more voices. And especially for me in that movement is bringing in voices of women and children, so the youth and women, because they're the ones that are disproportionately impacted by climate change and by environmental disaster. And
Mhm.
the more that I went into that movement, the more I realized it's actually more than that. It's like low income Black communities along coastal regions,
Mhm.
indigenous people that are at fracking and extraction sites across the country, elder and disabled people that are at the areas of flood, fire, any natural disaster that's getting exasperated. So I really realized that like this movement specifically um, was one where I could really support the most amount of people.
Yeah, that's really beautiful work that you're doing, and I admire you so much for that. So, what does liberation look like to you? So, not just in theory, but as a lived daily practice.
Yeah, I think right now it's been super important, especially with the current administration, to like continue to foster feeling
Mhm.
liberated. And so when you have an administration that is like pretty much showcasing all of the negative messages that I had to overcome to come out as trans, to come
Yeah,
out as queer, to live my life authentically. Like everything that the administration is showing about our access to bathrooms, our
yeah,
ability to have protected families, to be able to marry across the country, all these things that are now being infiltrated, those are all messages that I can pretty much confidently say that most queer and trans people have had to overcome
yeah,
just to come out of the closet, as we like to say. And um, because of that, I actually feel really like audacious during this time. Like I've seen a
yeah,
lot of my peers really kind of shut down and kind of want to retract and kind of hide under a rock. And I think for the most part, when we keep hearing about all these messed up things they're doing, I mean, they're reconsidering like reusing some of these Japanese internment camps. Like there's just like
yeah. I saw that.
it's pretty ridiculous
Yeah,
how they are throwing everything against the wall and seeing what sticks to keep us scared and shut
yeah,
down. And so I think that I am so grateful that I have done the individual work to liberate myself from those messages. I'm so grateful that I have a community around me, because that's what makes me feel liberated. Having people around me that love and support who I am, regardless of what's going on in my life, makes me feel like I'm in an environment where I can be liberated.
yeah,
And being liberated means maintaining my peace and my sanity when things in my environment are challenging me to get dysregulated, to be in complete chaos, to be so anxious that I can barely function. And so being liberated means taking care of myself first so that I can
mhm,
show up for my community, so I can show up for myself. So holding that time in the morning to meditate, as simple as that sounds, and that translates to me feeling empowered to make the calls to
Yeah.
Congress when we really need them to step up and advocate for people like me as their constituents. So, that through line really allows me to feel empowered. And that has been years and decades of work where I have had to like pretty much stare at myself in the mirror and remind myself that I matter, that what I have to share is worthy, and how I want to shape this country is important. It's not only white men that get to do that. And so that can only be cultivated by having people around me that love and validate me, and by making the space for myself to love myself. So for me, that's meditation, that's affirmations, that's reading books that make me feel good, that's surrounding
Mm.
myself with people that look like me. Um, yeah, I would say that in the spectrum of liberated, I feel like
Yeah.
I'm in a good place, thankfully, and I want to continue to encourage more people to make space for themselves so that their passions can shine through with their actions.
Yeah, no, I love that. And thank you for saying that too, because that's actually a common theme that I've noticed coming up with my guests too, that just us being ourselves is like a radical act of resistance. And just by us telling our stories, because I think when it comes to like anti-trans legislation or, just like immigration, all these different issues that are coming up, I think it reduces people. Yeah, it totally dehumanizing folks and putting them to numbers and whereas like we each have our stories to tell and everything. So yeah, they thank you for sharing that though, and how that's been a part of your story as well. So you describe yourself as a cultural strategist. For those who might not know, what does cultural strategy mean in practice?
Yeah, so I'm so fortunate enough that I have had mentors and I have followed the teachings of a lot of audacious, particularly women of color who have shaped culture. So
Hmm.
like Octavia Butler, Toni Morrison are like kind of like my foundational like cultural strategists. Like they have built worlds and allowed us to exist in them. And through that, imagine what life could look like as a woman of color being queer, or as uh people of color in this, white dominated society.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I've also been fortunate enough to like be in the cultural space now. And so my work in cultural strategy has looked like really allowing myself to take a step back from like continuously pushing on policy and advocacy, and continuously like fighting the economic system to try to make space for labor equity, for fair trade, for like really I at some point I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing as an activist. I don't really know what I'm doing as a career. And I met people who were like, kind of broke it down for me. They're like, you want to advance policy, you have to change people's minds, people's attitudes, people's hearts. You want to change the way that economic policy continuously exploits and extracts migrants, people of color, folks at the margins, and pretty much has like, created systems of oppression to continue making profits for few. They're like, you have to influence the culture, you have to influence people's self-worth, how they view themselves, how they contribute to the market, how they're exploited, and how to challenge the economic system. And that's all attitudes and beliefs. And so when I was fortunate to be sit down by a few cultural strategists around that, I was like, whoa, like
Mm.
changing people's hearts and minds is like so powerful. And so I was taught about different movements, how you can see their trajectory, that um, seeing people on TV that look like you
Mhm.
really allows for um, folks like us to have more power around elections, for example, where
Mm.
candidates will want to get the Latino vote because now we're more on television. There's like so many ways that you can look at culture from so many ways. And similarly, like with Native people, them preserving their language, preserving their culture is like
Mm.
a climate resilience strategy. Like we need that knowledge in order for us to survive wildfires, to survive floods, to survive extreme weather. Um, and I started to really kind of look at that. And I think what made it very evident that I was a cultural strategist, that cultural strategy work is very important in our movement, is that the current MAGA movement is one that started, in the 60s and the
Mm.
70s. And that was predominantly a cultural strategy. You're talking about white supremacists indoctrinating more white people into their
Mm,
ideology through appealing to their ideas of being left behind, of not getting what they're due, around appealing to their ideas of supremacy thinking and their racist ideologies, and that has been building up to this moment, and that's like a 40-50 year project that they've been working on. And now with Project 2025 we can see where they're headed, that they want
mm,
to take us to this um, white Christian evangelical like ideology that most of us actually don't fit into. And so that is a cultural project. And so when I saw myself kind of hitting this
mm.
realization or this wall of like, there's only so much we can do in policy, and in economics, we're just constantly fighting and reacting. There's actually no building.
Yeah.
I realized I wanted to be part of the group of people who, this is my analogy, who kind of hold the flashlight in the dark tunnel as we go through. And so that requires being able to like assess our current culture, what's possible now, what's irritating and or creating hope for the masses, and how to
Yeah.
leverage storytelling narratives to build that larger culture. And so I would say that a lot of my work in the last 10 years has been really focused on taking advantage of what's possible and also
Mhm.
continuing to push the edge of what most people would be willing to do. And, wins like marriage equality wouldn't have been possible if there wasn't cultural strategists kind of assessing and keeping their pulse on like what was
Yeah.
possible for our hearts and minds. And storytelling is a big part of that.
Mm.
And that's why I also organize artists a lot. I spend a lot of time organizing them by providing residencies, fellowships, advocating for them in institutions. Whenever I can, continuing to ally myself in projects that help center them. So
Oh.
being a cultural strategist, here's my bullet point. Being a cultural strategist is really being afforded the privilege to look at how organizing culture is the biggest key to advance
Yeah.
economic and policy work, and audaciously attempting and making mistakes and at times winning with stories that will help build a larger wave, a larger movement to kind of shift our ideologies by, appealing to our hearts and minds so that we can create a better world for everybody and not just for a few.
Yeah, no, I really love that. And just building on that, through your work, you've centered marginalized voices in climate conversations. Why is this centering so essential and still so rare? I know you touched about it on this a little, but I'd love for you to further expand on that.
That's interesting because I think in the last like maybe 2 years, I've really sat with um, the difference between equality and equity.
Hmm.
And, like when I started as an activist, when I was like 18, 19, I think my first like big thing was like when I was 16, I tried getting lights at my local park in San Diego,
Hmm.
California. Like that was like my first, like, yeah, I believe in social change, I
Yeah.
can make a difference. And I think that when I started doing that work, I understood equality. Like I understood we should all have the same thing. Like I really understood it. And then you get into more like critical race thinking, or you get
Yeah.
into more like analytical thinking, and you can kind of break it down. And I think by the time I like graduated college when I was like 20, 21, I think I understood,
Mhm.
equality is not the ideal. Like if you give everybody the same thing, like they're all starting at different places. So it's not actually going to
Right.
be helpful. Like if you give someone who has money $2 versus someone who's like living on the streets, getting by day to day, like those $2 are not going to go as far as somebody else who's a little bit more stable. $2 isn't anything in this economy, but as an
Yeah.
example, for lack of better words. And I think that I understood it conceptually, but it wasn't until the last 2 years when I really realized how dangerous equality thinking is actually, that a lot of people who are privileged in our society think that if they just give us the same thing that they have, that is enough for
Yeah.
us to be okay and functional. And I think I understand this politically, but I think in the last couple of years, it's really like cemented deep in me that like every individual community, every individual frontline group deserves the the microphone to like advocate for what they need, what's going to make their life better. And the reason why this has become so important to me is like I really believe in biodiversity as a huge strategy that we can use to survive climate change, to
Mhm.
really better our society. And what that means is like every person deserves to have what they need, no matter how different it is from everybody else. And um, I think that's why centering communities to me is important. And the more that I went into disability justice pedagogies, the more that I understand that is that I think that as a society, we would really benefit if we could be more in proximity with understanding access, accessibility, and equity as a very good, as a very like foundational pillar of how we do our work, because through that we'll be able to like really address some of the major issues that our society has, which is we are so binary thinkers. We think,
Mhm.
oh, if you get a penny, then I gotta give you a penny. So then we just gotta give two pennies. But there's an like
Yeah.
we have to continue to challenge ourselves as critical thinkers and as people who can hold complexity because we have to be able to center different people throughout um, our movements. And the reason why this is so important to me is because we're not going to be able to get out of this mess unless we understand that everybody has different needs and that we have to be willing to kind of experiment and be messy with giving some people a little bit more,
Mhm.
if that means that their chances of survival will increase because those group of people have something valuable to offer us just by their mere sense of existence and by what they contribute. So it's not a very like, let's say, clear answer, but
Yeah.
overall I feel like I'm challenging my own ideas of centering, and by
Mhm.
understanding that it's more complicated, it's more layered, that everybody has a set of competing needs, and that we have to be willing to juggle and embrace complexity in order for everybody to be able to show up at the table fully resourced so we can all make decisions for ourselves and our communities.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I really love that. And I'd love to talk to with you about your work with the Shelterwood Collective. So this is such an ambitious and visionary project. Can you tell us how it came to be and what makes it different from other land restoration efforts?
Yeah, so initially, I co-founded it in 2020. And the goal of the project was to really intersect land conservation with cultural strategy. So really looking at what are the cultural reparations that are needed in order for a land and ecology to thrive. And this is in the foundational belief that, as I was mentioning to you, that biocultural diversity is going to be essential in order for our ecology to survive, this next climate chaos that we are already
Mm.
in. And what that looks like is like supporting Native communities to be able to reintegrate their language,
Mhm.
their botanical practices, their treatment of a forest. And I will say that this was an experimental project in full transparency. And
Mhm.
we went into it pretty ambitiously. And so what ended up happening was we did the thing that a lot of people do in movements and especially in nonprofits where you start to get asks from foundations and you just kind of pile on
Yeah.
deliverables. And the project did a really great job at holding everything. We were holding accessibility, we were holding Black reparations, we were holding Native sovereignty, we were holding LGBTQ communities, and all while also maintaining conservation efforts of protecting the forest. And so I would say that this project was very radical because it attempted to not just what do they say, shoot for the stars, but we
Mhm.
actually, I think we got into the spaceship and we started building to get to the star. And so I think over the last 5 years, what I learned was that there actually has to be a really good balance around what are the priorities and what aren't. And then for my next land project, I'm going to be looking at similar to what you were asking me, at centering particular groups of people to
Mhm.
really allow for certain communities to fully shine before we start adding more communities to
Yeah.
get into the weeds of what land stewardship, what language preservation, what cultural restoration, what all of those could look like. And I think that that's okay. I think it's okay for us as groups of people at this time when we have DEI being attacked, when our
Yeah.
communities are being pinned up against each other quite overtly now with this administration, that it's okay if we say, you know what, this like the next year to 2 years, we're actually just going to focus on indigenous migrant communities, and we're going to learn from them what their footprint, what their approach could look like to conservation. So I had an artist fellowship, I had an artist residency, because again, I always believe that artists should be at the center of how we drive cultural
Mhm.
work and document it. They're important for documenting as well. And then I reached a point where I was like, we really just need this organization to focus on the conservation side of the
Yeah.
work. And so when I left, we had restored about 150 acres out of
Wow.
878, and that was in 4 years, three
Wow.
years. And so I think I'm really proud of that work. And again, I'm looking for my next land project for it to be more community centered, and
Mhm.
specifically looking at rematriation as the center piece of how all of the work flows out of it.
Wow, that's really incredible. Yeah, that's wonderful work that you did. And I also want to talk about climate woke. So this is also an amazing concept. What inspired its creation, and what gap were you trying to fill in the climate movement?
So, uh, in the climate movement, when I came in 2012, 2014, when I
Hmm.
came to the climate movement 2014, it was predominantly white. I mean, you could not go to any really website or any campaign or any communications effort without seeing like a polar bear that was drowning,
Hmm.
ice cap that was melting, and it was pretty much centered around that and the impending threat of animals being extinct. These are all very important things. In fact, I
Right.
think that for some communities, especially affluent white communities, like that's all they wanted to know, like seeing how um, changing climate and rising sea levels were going to be impacting coastal communities, which were in some areas predominantly low income. That wasn't really what folks wanted to see. And so when I came in 2014, I spent about a year to maybe a year and a half visiting communities across the Central Valley in California. And that led me to some communities in the Southwest. And then eventually it led me to some communities near the Gulf. And I started to see, the prevalence of the extraction economy. So looking at plants, manufacturing, water pollution, everything from agricultural runoff to fossil fuel runoff, fracking in the Central Valley, looking at all these systems that we all depend on a day to day and that are huge stakeholders in how the global economy functions, um, and how they were creating cancer, high, short death rates. So, like people's life expectancy being shorter. And it just kind of, um, it like demoralized me a little bit to see how these systems were specifically killing and hurting kids of color. Like
Yeah.
I saw and I met a lot of Black, Indigenous, and migrant kids who all had asthma, who were living in areas that were really hot, who had survived hurricanes at this point.
Yeah.
And I uh, I met a lot of really amazing young people. And every time that I came back from one of these trips, we would try to do a podcast or a photo highlight of what we had done, or we would do write articles and see if magazines would pick them up, or we'd do short video. Um, every time I'd come back, I'd feel more motivated to keep telling the story. But then what kept coming back to me is there isn't this like staple for
Mm-hmm.
our people. And so I was fortunate enough that I had good relationships with funders and communication firms. And we all kind of I started to gather folks at a table and we started to talk. And my collaborators, Fabiana Rodriguez at this time, and
Mm-hmm.
we started to gather people. And I, I'd say we need something. Like we need something to kind of tie everybody in.
Yeah.
And we had some folks who were part of the Black Lives Matter movement, and they were like, so, what do we play on? And I was like, look, seeing young Black kids that are disproportionately being pushed out into rural communities in California and
Yeah.
having the highest rates of asthma, like that one for me was like it hit home because it's right here where we were at the peak of the Black Lives Matter taking off.
Mm-hmm.
And we were having a hard time making those connections across the racial justice movement and the climate movement. So at the time, it was very timely and it felt very relevant. And we came up with like climate woke. And it was supposed to be a cultural signifier. So something that if you see, you can associate it with
Mm-hmm.
something else. For us, it was going to be commissions and video and messaging. And I think what it ended up becoming was a cultural signifier that highlighted talking about climate and environmental stuff from people of color. And so it just
Yeah.
kind of naturally evolved. And it's one of my proudest works that I've ever done. So under it, we did a lot of commissions. We were able to pay a lot of artists to interpret what that meant to them and for them to create visual work, short content that we even were able to work with some beaters. We did convenings, we gathered funders, like we did a lot of really great stuff. And I was able to grow as a filmmaker underneath it as well, which that was a lovely surprise. And so I wrote a lot of really original, I wrote some original content that was really funny.
Mm-hmm.
And then through that, I was commissioned to also screenwrite for other organizations. So it kind of took off for as its own project and it helped me take off as well. And
Yeah.
then I think around 2018, when the Global Climate Action Summit started, that's when we pushed out the logo pretty hard. So we had a very supportive funder who helped us get T-shirts and posters. And now I look at a lot of marches from around 2018 to like 2020, and it's like everywhere. You always see somebody with a T-shirt or something. And
That's
so
awesome.
it makes me pretty proud. So it was about a year and a half of studying
Yeah.
and then just taking a risk.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. So how do you bring people into the climate justice conversation who might feel disconnected or overwhelmed by it? Yeah, what kind of advice can you give?
I think um, this past year, I've spent a lot of time learning about ecological systems and specifically the cycles of the earth
Hmm.
from uh, the past few extinctions and like what species have been able to stay versus what haven't. And I would say, you know, the earth has is so wise.
Yeah.
Um, and so um, there's no such thing as the climate justice or the environmental justice movement. Like what
Yeah.
it really is we're humans living on this rock. And this rock has been through many, many shapes, many changes, many transformations. And so it's been everything from ice to fire to no oxygen to all carbon. It's
Hmm.
completely shifted and the species have shifted with it. And so I would say that this isn't a movement. This isn't something to be scared of. This is what the earth does. The earth changes. The difference is that since the industrialization period, we've kind of come in and we've accelerated a natural cycle
Hmm.
of the earth's ability to shift in order to sustain itself and sustain most of life.
Yeah.
And even then, in all the extinctions that the earth has had, we've lost like 80 to 90% of the biodiversity that the earth has created in all of its lifetime. Like we're the
Wow.
last like 2 to 3%, you know?
Wow.
So she's like really doing the best she can to keep us here. And after
Yeah.
us, there will be more life. There will maybe will be different kinds of mammals. So
Yeah.
I would just say if you're passionate about the earth, if you're passionate about climate change, if you're concerned at all about it, just learn about it
Mhm.
from uh, the reality that the earth is shifting, and then think about what do you need for yourself to be able to continue existing in a way that makes you feel like you're doing the best you can to help our species survive the mass extinction that we're in. A lot of scientists are like, we're already in the sixth mass extinction,
Wow.
and they're like, we just are too dumb to realize it. And the reality is, we are. We here in Texas, we just had a huge, massive flood, and our current administration is going to make it harder for us to stay on top of it and
Yeah.
increase the survival rates of our people. And so for us, it's like, what do you need to learn for yourself? What do you want to contribute to make sure that people around you know that this is happening?
Yeah.
Things are going to get colder, things are going to get hotter, and we're going to need to be able to migrate. And now that we live in a country where migration is being criminalized and villainized, it's going to be harder for a lot of us to get our needs met. And so, if what feels bearable to you is like fighting for housing rights, or,
Hmm.
that is part of our survival, that is part of adapting to climate change. So I would say this isn't a movement. This is really a fight for our survival as a species. And this is what our ancestors have been doing. It just looks way more stark and way more difficult now than it has before. And so we have to adapt with it. So
Hmm.
join a movement, get on a few newsletter to keep staying informed, and don't let it overwhelm you. Just start building your community around you that you can call if and or when a flood, a fire comes,
Yeah.
a sinkhole pops up out of nowhere, because we're destabilizing our ecology and we're going to need each other to survive.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And in a world that can feel heavy with injustice, what keeps you grounded and creatively inspired? Like what helps keep you going?
This is going to be so cheesy, but I I'm having my first child, and
Wow,
uh,
congratulations.
thank you.
That's wonderful.
I've been wanting to be a parent for a few years now, and um, when I get really overwhelmed about the state of the country, or messages in my
Hmm.
brain start coming in of like, we're not even gonna survive. Like, why are we even here? I what keeps me motivated is that there is gonna be a next generation.
Uh-huh.
There will always be a next generation, even if the next generation is like my grandchildren protected this one forest that was able to, like, you know, help whatever mammals were there to survive,
Yeah.
whatever was destabilizing the ecology. Like, that is my direct connection to the next generation. So what keeps gives me hope is that, like, my work isn't just about helping us survive. I do believe that we are a keystone species, and that if we really do our work, we can help support the earth in this transition.
Hmm.
And at the very least, I can make a difference in other than human kin, like trees and birds and fish and other mammals on the earth. And so that keeps me motivated, that like I'm gonna be a parent, and my child is gonna make a difference in some way, shape, or form. And I believe in the next generation. There's like nothing about me that feels scared about the future. It might be really hard, or it might be really easy. I don't know. I would love if, like, all the skyscrapers would just fall, and like all of us, we're safe from it. And at the end of the day, we're all like, oh, we just don't have jobs anymore. Cool. Now
Yeah.
we can do the things we want to love, like produce podcasts, or like grow our
Yeah.
garden, or like go on nature walks and learn about trees that we've stared at for 20 years that we don't even know what they're called. So I stay hopeful because I do believe in the next generation.
Yeah. No, I really love that. And again, congratulations. I'm so
Thank
happy for
you.
you. And so, what is one story, idea, or call to action that you want our listeners to carry with them after this conversation?
Um, I mean, I would say that right now, if you're feeling inspired to learn about
Hmm.
something new, I would say do it. I'm in my learning phase right now. So it's before we started recording, Denise, I had mentioned to you about all these classes I'm taking and all
Yeah.
these books that I'm reading. And I would say that right now, when the global economy is shifting, when our national governments are shifting drastically, and our neighbors are starting to get more scary and or more scared. That's like the spectrum. Um, that it's important to foster your creativity, and I think learning is one of those things. And so if
Mm-hmm.
you're excited about a particular thing, even if it's like a video game and how it's made, I would say nurture every part of you that still is excited to learn, because that is the gateway to hopefulness and to joy, and things that make life worth living. And I would hate to take my last breath either, because something's happening climately, or I reach old age and I not maintain some level of curiosity with this amazing planet that we live on. Like, it blows my mind every day that I just like live on this rock that has made everything perfect for me to have. It
Yeah.
just blows my mind. So stay curious and keep learning.
Yeah, I love that. That's so beautiful. So, what's like maybe even one meaningful action that our listeners can take today, even if it's like something small? Like what's something small that they could do but meaningful that you would recommend that folks do?
I would say eat local. I
Mm,
think right now, day and age, especially because our globalized economy is like really threatening our existence, I would say that, what has been advancing, supporting folks in Palestine is boycotting businesses. What has been supporting our economy with the tariff shifts from our federal government has been us shopping locally. And I would say, it feels like, conversations that um it just feels weird to be saying like that's what we should be doing. But I do actually genuinely believe that if we can support local businesses, like we're fostering and making that web of support much stronger.
yeah.
So our local farmers are at the farmers market, our local crops, our local suppliers, our local repair shops. That is probably the best thing you could do. And the reason why that's important for the planet is it also reduces your carbon impact,
Mm,
from goods being shipped around the earth to reach your home. And I would say, second thing from that is to be really conscious about where you put your labor and your hard-earned resources.
mhm.
You shouldn't be supporting businesses that don't share your same values.
Yeah. No, I love that. So, thank you so much for your time today. I had a really wonderful time speaking with you, and I feel inspired to take action too. But lastly, before we wrap up our conversation, how can people find you if they want to connect with you?
You can find me on my website, www.layelcamargo.com. If
Mhm.
you go to my contacts page, you can schedule a 30-minute meeting with me, or you could just send me a message. I'm still finalizing it, so apologies. Some things look like they're still under construction. And then you can also follow me on Instagram at Layel Camargo. And I'm not on any other social media platform, and my Facebook's pretty personal. So Instagram and my website.
Okay, well, thank you again. And yeah, I hope that you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Denise. Bye.
Okay. Bye. Thank you for being here and tuning in to Voices That Propel Us, stories of justice, action, and community. Your presence in this movement matters. If today's conversation moved you, share it, talk about it, and keep the work going. Together, we're not just imagining change, we're making it. Until next time, stay bold, stay grounded, and stay in the fight.
Every time I feel so mad inside